How close was Hitler to winning Operation Barbarossa? After the war, some generals and historians began saying that Barbarossa, and even the war on the whole, was doomed because of poor decisions made by Hitler, and that he needed to listen to his generals instead of sacking them. Being dead, Hitler became an easy scapegoat. But it wasn't always the case that his decisions were bad. Granted, there are instances later in the war where Hitler disregards his generals and made bad calls, for instance the Battle of the Bulge. However, the war was more or less a foregone conclusion at that point. During Barbarossa, where important decisions had more of an impact, quite often, Hitler ends up making the right call. Case in point, Hitler's generals believed that taking Moscow meant certain victory, and it should be prioritised. However, there are reasons suggesting otherwise. Don't get me wrong, Moscow was still very important. It had vital railways around it, the government were there, and of course it was the capital. And when the capital fell in nations such as France earlier in the war, they would more often than not surrender. However, Hitler made it crystal clear that surrender meant death and enslavement for the Soviets. As far back as the 1920s, when he wrote Mein Kampf, Hitler was planning to conquer Russia and never hid the fact that he saw the Soviets and communism as Germany's greatest enemy, going as far to say that people of Slavic blood were subhuman or aliens. His motivation for conquering Russia was the idea of attaining Lebensraum, or living space and resources, for an ever-growing German population. This involved the Hunger Plan, which would have seen over 30 million Russians starve to death in an extermination effort that would have dwarfed even the Holocaust. He also wanted to enslave enough Russian peasants and farmers to tend the land and keep things ticking over. In short, there were really only two options for the Soviets: to die once occupied or die fighting. With that in mind, even if Moscow fell, it's safe to say they aren't suddenly going to choose to die under occupation. Remember, by the time the Germans were close to Moscow, other important cities had been captured or besieged, like Kiev, Smolensk and Leningrad. Stalingrad also came close the following year, all which greatly damaged the Soviet economy and war effort. But still, surrender was never considered. They knew what awaited them if they gave up. It's likely the Germans would have had to conquer every square inch of Soviet land to claim victory, and by the time the Germans are at the gates of Moscow, their forces are already a shadow of their former self, so that wouldn't realistically be achievable. Basically, taking Moscow would have hurt the Russians, but I don't think it would have been all she wrote. If he didn't know initially, Hitler eventually came to this realization. The war was inevitably going to become a war of attrition, so for him, Moscow was, or at the very least became, a nice victory to claim, but it was not the be-all, end-all. The resources of Ukraine and the oil fields in the south were far more crucial in his eyes, and taking into account Germany's lack of oil and other supplies, this is a prime instance where Hitler was right to give less priority to the Moscow push. For the full story, click the link below.